Welcome to the first TDM debate. This debate is between TDM Tim and Eberlonian, who will be referred to as Tim and Landon respectively. I am TDM TA and I will be moderating this debate. The overall topic will be capitalism versus socialism, but there will be other questions discussed later in the debate that are not regarding those two topics. We will begin with opening statements and we will go to Tim for his statement.
Thank you very much, TDM TA. And for my opening statement, my beliefs on the subject of capitalism versus socialism are based on the central idea that a free and open society can only exist when the rights and liberties of the individual are held in high regard. Despite my central belief of individual liberty, I differ from many of the views that my libertarian counterparts in the United States of America hold. One cannot hold the belief that the tyranny of a central authoritarian government is damaging towards a free society, while expecting the tyranny of central authoritarian corporations as simply an aspect of free society. For a man to be free, he must live in a society where he and his fellow man hold a say not only in the way they are governed, but in the way in which they use their labor. Life must be built from the ground up in a way in which each community and each place of labor is organized by the will of the people, not by the whim of those on top who wish to make decisions based on their own beliefs and desires.
All right, would Landon like to make a rebuttal?
Yes, I would, and thank you for giving me that cue. Tim here had mentioned that the people are controlled by, let's go with controlled. We can switch the language later, but controlled by the companies. They control the way the labor operates. And I feel like the people control the companies more than the companies control the people, because the people, consumers, choose to go to that company for their service and products. So the idea of people being controlled by companies, I feel like that doesn't fly in America as is right now, and we can certainly prevent that from ever happening if we needed to, but I don't think that is a problem with a capitalistic society.
In rebuttal to that, if I may.
Of course.
My explanation of the tyranny of corporations was not one of the tyranny of corporations on individual citizens who do not participate in the corporations, although that can and does happen in certain situations. My description of the tyranny of corporations applies mainly to the laborers that actually work and form the foundation of said corporation. In many a situation, the laborers of a corporation have no input at all into the hours they work, the way in which they work, exactly how much they get paid. And to me, that is the definition of tyranny, because you are giving a service to this corporation. You are creating labor, and in return, the corporation determines without any input from you what value you will get from that and how you will do that labor. So in rebuttal, simply put, I was not discussing citizens that are not participating in those corporations, but the actual laborers who work there.
Oh. Am I able to rebuttal once again?
No, we got to go on to your opening statement.
All right. Well, I am a capitalist. I don't pretend to not be. I do believe in the marketplace choosing its own companies that they prefer and do not prefer. And I feel like the people being able to choose that, the people having this influence on the marketplace, is healthier than the government mandating certain elements of the free market to operate in certain ways. I also believe that the amount of effort, and kind of a rebuttal to what Tim had mentioned, but the amount of effort you put into your work should be proportional to the amount of payment you receive, and the company kind of does decide that. And if the person who wants to work for that company doesn't feel like they're being paid enough, They can look towards another company who's willing to pay more for their services. And if once again a company has decided that they are not worth the money they think they are worth, then I don't think that's a problem with the companies. I feel like the person thinks they're worth more when they're not putting as much effort as they should be to get that amount of money that they so choose, that they so decide that they deserve. I believe that capitalism, rather than its evil portrayal of greed that many seem to believe, is more intended to have a moral element to it, where the companies put consumers before the profit. And I'll get into this more later, but it's about a sanctified capitalism coined by Dave Ramsey. It basically is just kind of where consumers choose the profits, so the companies need to provide a service to get those profits, not they do the service for the profits. They do the service for the sake of the service, not to get profits. That's the way to put it around. I also believe that the marketplace should be able to control the aspects again, and I feel like that's a key point of my argument I'm making today. And the marketplace decides this by deciding its own worth on the brands, services, and products that the companies put forth. I don't like the idea of subsidies. I think we'll probably get into that in the debate for failing companies and businesses, like with the GMC bailout, the General Motors bailout. I do, however, favor investment into research and technology because it will lead to more economic prosperity. I think that innovation is higher in a capitalistic society because of the free market choices and less government regulation, and all the capitalistic philosophy encourages rewards for merit. For how much you put in, you'll get out that much. And I think there are many examples of companies and products that have come out of capitalism that take full use of this idea of I guess the American dream. I feel like that's kind of plays into the capitalist philosophy.
All right. Does Tim have a rebuttal?
Oh, yes, I do. Thank you very much. In rebuttal to that, I would like to agree with you that I do not believe in any way, shape, or form that government control over the marketplace is a step towards the right direction by my stances. But as well, you had pointed out that individuals who work in a corporation who feel like they aren't getting paid as much as they do can go and shop to other corporations. One thing I would like to point out, though, is that, for instance, like let's take fast food as an example. At best, you might get $1 or $2 more, depending on what fast food place you go to. But the very fundamental understanding of a contract between a laborer and the capitalist is the understanding that you as the laborer will produce more economic output than you are paid. Now, in no way, shape, or form am I claiming by stating that I think you should get every penny's worth of value you create, because obviously the company needs a way to pay their bills and pay other employees and so forth. What I'm saying is that you as the worker, and not you as an individual, but you as the workers as a whole, should have a say in how that is divvied up. It is not fair that the capitalists, the managers and such, get to decide everything without labor's input, when labor is the absolute fundamental core of how the business does its daily operations. Without labor, the business would not produce profit. Therefore, labor is the key. Not saying capitalists, managers, whatever you want to address them as, don't have an important role, but they share a role, they share only one of many roles that are necessary in the business's functioning, and they should not be able to call all the shots, when labor is, without a doubt, one of the key aspects of a human's life.
If I may rebuttal, I do think that a lot of workers who do go to their employers and ask for raises, they will be evaluated by that employer on their services. The work they put in, they will evaluate that work and see if perhaps, yes, they do deserve a raise because they're going above and beyond what they're asked for in the job description. And I feel like if you're simply asking for a raise and you don't provide enough work to justify that wage, the company shouldn't have to give you that raise. The company should be able to decide that, hey, yeah, you're going above and beyond. You're doing more than what we asked for. Here, have a raise, sort of deal. And most raises that happen in companies kind of come from this basis. When you work with a company long enough and you do more work than what is necessary and you do it well, then your company will give you that raise.
All right. So I want to move on to the first question of the debate. Now, this question is going to be directed towards Landon. And the question is, so capitalism lays upon the idea of the free market and a reduction of government interference. So do you believe that the concept of crony capitalism and the issue of worker exploitation are issues that can be resolved within the free market? Or is it an idea or a complex issue that must be resolved through the government?
Okay, this is a good question, and I'd like to break it down. And short answer, it's going to need some government interference, as much as my libertarian side doesn't want to quite say that, because part of what causes crony capitalism is companies and businesses being able to donate to these, well, quote unquote, donate, kind of can get into bribing territory with politicians to get legislation passed through that helps those companies. And I think that is a poor side effect of our system that we have at the moment. And I'd like to readdress that. And there are several ways we can do that. And I think movements such as Wolfpack are a good start. I would like to believe that the marketplace can handle most situations, but I feel like with corruption of businesses, it can be addressed governmentally, but on some scale, the free marketplace can decide, hey, I don't like what this company is doing, and take their business elsewhere. It's kind of like a boycott. They decide, hey, I don't like this company. It's doing something I do not approve of. Take your business elsewhere. There are plenty of other companies who probably aren't corrupt and will do things that you agree with.
Okay. Landon, not Landon, Tim, would you like to respond to that?
Yes, please. Thank you. So in response to that, I will also break it up into two parts. For my first part, I would like to go back to a little bit of history here with the formation of the United States itself. I am not a proponent, as I know you are, Landon, of authoritarian governments and less democratic governments. What the past couple of hundreds of years in governance has been a revolution of more individual say and more individual power from the citizens themselves over the way their lives are governed and over the way the rule of law is constructed. Now, I think it is crony, and to reference crony capitalism, I think it is not possible to solve the issue of power being amassed into a few individuals' hands, which is what I think is what happens during crony capitalism, why crony capitalism actually becomes. I don't think that can happen without the will of the people having more say in it. And I do not think the market itself is enough say over the will of the people. For instance, Walmart, I think, is a terrible perpetrator of crony capitalism, essentially. And no one's not going to purchase from Walmart because of the cheap prices. People who don't have the money to go anywhere else will go to Walmart. Walmart will stay in business, and Walmart will be able to continue to perpetrate its bad business practices because of that. So I don't think the market is self-regulating because of that. But I also don't think that government interference would directly cause a major change in that. I think it will have to come from the ground up of reorganizing our economies like we have done our governments in the past towards a more democratic say, where it's not these large conglomerates that have gained power over huge markets like Walmart, but instead more along the lines of local businesses where individuals from the community have more say into the operations of that business, whether it be their purchasing power or them directly working there and knowing the owner and being able to form a rapport with that owner.
All right. So with that said, I want to move on to the second question, which is still related to what this question is about. So this was still for Landon. So in addition to crony capitalism and what we were just talking about, do you believe that crony capitalism itself is a function of capitalism, or do you think it's a function of something else?
I believe I'm starting first.
Well, this is just a question for you, so.
Oh, just a question for me. Okay. Well, I think I touch upon this a little bit in my description, but I think it is more a product of our current system than it is of capitalism itself. And this is kind of what I led to in the opening statement I made, where capitalism has a greed portrayal attached to it, a bad connotation attached to it by many. And I feel like the capitalism was intended to be virtuous. It was intended to be sanctified. It was intended to have a moral compass attached to it. Where unlike our current system, which doesn't quite do this, this idea of virtuous capitalism, which I believe is true capitalism, is a philosophy that proposes good businesses are about serving the consumers and then getting your paycheck. Without serving your consumers in a moral and ethical way and providing them the quality services they're paying for, you won't get you won't get your profits, or you'll at least get a diminished amount. And after serving those individuals in the manner of which the company cares about servicing them, they'll see large profits because the people grow. The company's product or service becomes a brand. It becomes something people start to care about. And this is what I believe capitalism is about. It's about building a brand, building a trust within the people because you cared about their services to provide a good service for those people. And in return, you get money, but the main focus is to provide that service to those people.
All right, Tim, do you want to go ahead and respond to that?
Of course. Now, I hold a vastly different view on that. I believe personally that at the heart of capitalism is a sense of never-ending growth and progress, which in a way is a good thing. It's why we have gotten all the technological improvements we have so quickly and why we have advanced so quickly as a society. But I think at its core, since at least the system by which capitalism has run for the past 100 or so years with investor capitalism and the constant demand to return more and more profit to the investors every quarter, there is no moral concern. And I think that is at the core of what capitalism eventually becomes without either extreme regulation or a complete change in how society functions. Because a business does not operate in any way, shape, or form about the concerns of the customers. It operates about how it can make more profit over the next quarters. And that may include, and usually does, some concerns of the customer. Without a doubt, the customer wants cheaper products, or the customer wants this or that. But many things, in many ways, it will avoid other concerns of the consumers. So many consumers may want ethical products, but ethical products aren't cheap. And they, as a usual rule, capitalist companies will determine to go with cheaper products for a larger market for more profit over the course of the next couple quarters. Of course, there are outliers in every industry. There's companies that go for those consumers that the larger companies don't go for, but those larger companies then perpetuate the cycle of unethical products that might have been made from really cheap labor that's not being paid nearly a living wage, or products that might even be so unethical that it's along the lines of blood diamonds. And I believe that's at the essence of capitalism, the desire to drive prices lower, lower, and lower to the bottom dollar.
All right. So now I want to move on to the questions that are specifically for Timmy. There's two of them, so let's start with the first one. So the basic principles of anarcho-syndicalism are solidarity, direct action, direct democracy, or worker self-management. So with this said, do you believe that the workers themselves can produce a more efficient workplace than leadership in a corporation can?
Well, I would like to answer that two ways, yes and no, and I'll explain why. No, in the short run. Without a doubt, I will concede to Landon here on the fact that capitalism does create extreme progress extremely quickly. But I don't think it is sustainable. I think if you come to a system by which workers manage themselves and you form these syndications, these unions that actually have more power give more powers to the workers, that what you'll find is on the long run, society progresses better, and in ways not possible through capitalism. So I think at the core of a laborer and at the core of a human being, I would say, is the desire for creative work. By creative work, I don't mean the arts or anything that we assume as creative under capitalism. But creative work to me is any laborer's endeavor to do what he wishes to do. So a plumber does creative work in his own way. He knows how to lay pipes. He knows how to repair pipes and so forth in a creative way that is unique to him or unique to those that only have those skill sets. And I believe when you put the creative laborers in charge of managing themselves and managing their efforts, they will find new and unique ways that over the course of longer periods of time, that things will be done in a more efficient and really a more ethical way. You wouldn't have laborers being forced into low standards of living because they choose a specific endeavor. So feeding people, restaurant work is important to society, in my opinion. And so I don't think those people should be devalued just because they decide their creative labor is in the restaurant industry, in feeding others. And so I think it's not purely that under anarcho-syndicalism, society will organize themselves in a more purely capitalistic, efficient way, but in a more ethical and efficient way. So it may not ever reach the standards of efficiency and productiveness that we have with capitalism, but I believe it could reach near that and with more ethical standards.
Okay. Landon, would you like to respond to that?
You had, yes, I would. You had mentioned that the workers control that it comes from more of an ethical point, and I will give it to you when the workers control their own means of production, I guess, like being able to say what they get out of doing their own creative work, which you defined as respectively what they chose to do rather than just arts. When they get that choice, it becomes more ethical. But I don't think the situation right now puts them in a severely unethical situation, and it produces quite a lot of technological progress. And we also do have things like labor unions in today's society that help keep these companies in check to make sure that, hey, we're doing this work. We want our benefits, our payment, our working conditions to be this or that. So these labor unions keep the companies in check if they don't already keep themselves in check, or to a high enough degree.
All right. So, question 4, which is for Timmy again. So the end goal of syndicalism, as an ideology, more broadly so, is the abolition of the wage system. Do you agree with this notion? And if you do, what kind of replacement would you like to see?
Once again, I would like to answer this question with yes and no. Yes, on a more philosophical level, I do agree with the abolishment of the wage system. I think it is actually semi-insulting, the wage system and the way it works, in which one has a creative endeavor they wish to do, as I earlier described, not just artistic, but as any work they wish to do. They have a creative endeavor to do, and to some extent, there is that ability to do that endeavor. So companies are formed around it, and then they choose to go down that specific line, and yet aren't given a high enough wage to have a living. And so by that system, I do think it is insulting to a degree. But I would also preface that with, I don't think under the current technological standards and societal standards we have, it is actually possible to form a functioning society without wages. In fact, if I remember correctly, the only anarcho-syndicalist government of any sorts that has formed was in Catalonia during the Spanish Civil Wars. And if I remember correctly, the anarcho-syndicalist rebels continued with the wage system to some degree. It was more equalized, so you didn't have managers that had triple, quadruple the pay of their laborers, which is, I think, unethical in its basis. So I wouldn't say the abolishment of the wage system is necessary and or what I would look for currently in society. I think the equality in the wage system would be what I would strive towards. Not to say managers don't have their own specific tasks and goals that may or may not be harder than the laborers themselves, but I think it's a lie to say that management's job is somehow making them a superior in a hierarchical sense to the laborer. They are just another part of the corporation as a whole, or in a anarcho-syndicalist sense of the trade union in a whole. And so they serve their job. And I don't know if I would even go as far as saying that I'm for every employee in every company to get the same wage currently. I still don't think we're there yet either, though that would be a more end goal state for me. But I definitely think more equality can be brought towards wages, and the wage system can be changed and revamped highly.
All right, Landon, do you have a response to that?
There are a couple things that had caught my attention of what Tim had said. I guess the first thing that kind of caught my eye was the idea of an insulting wage. I was just kind of surprised by the term insulting wage, as like when you go into the work you choose to go into, you go into it accepting that you're going to be paid this amount. And I don't think if you choose to go into a lower paying job that you're doing the job for the money. Instead you're doing the job for the sake of that job. And I feel like having that insulting wage terms just a little off-putting. It's kind of strange. We can get into that more later if we want. But I also was caught by the idea of you had disclaimed that you don't want everyone in the company to be paid the same wage, or you don't think we're at that point yet. And I don't think we should ever get to that point. I think that depending on the work you put into the company, the difficulty of your job, and what you actually do in the job should determine your wage. So in this sense, I think that managers should make more than your waiters or your cashiers or your chefs. So depending on what you do for the job and how many stores you manage, if you're a manager, I feel like your wage depends on the amount of work you put into it. And if you're working these waiter jobs or cashier jobs, you're usually doing it for experience rather than the wage itself. But for those who are trying to live on that wage, the amount of work you put is bringing their customers, you're taking their orders, you're delivering the dishes to their plate. I don't think that's an incredibly difficult job. It's not incredibly demanding, and I think that the wages are relatively fair, especially when the customer also tips that waiter or waitress. So I feel like depending on the quality of their service, the customer will give you a higher wage. It's not higher wage, a higher tip, excuse me. So I feel like the idea of higher level staff being paid more as like a bad thing, I don't think it's a bad thing. I feel like they have more tasks, they have more demanding and technically difficult jobs to do than the, if you will, lower level staff.
All right. So those first 4 questions were more so to get a background on your guys' ideology, to more go in depth with it. So now I want these next few questions. I want to some of them are a little more scenario based, and I just kind of want to see what you guys think on these particular scenarios or these questions. So we'll start off with Landon for this one. So question 5 says, in an ideal scenario for you, you were presented with a budget and it needs to be balanced, or at least reined in. Generally, do you think it would be better to raise taxes or reduce spending? So more ideologically, do you think it would be better to do one of these things?
It's kind of, for me, it's kind of a balance between both. I would like to lower spending and direct some of the remaining spending towards paying back our debt, because I think that's particularly troubling for me to see our debt have risen to this point. But in general, under normal circumstances, I think money is better kept in the consumers, the citizens' pockets, and I would like to see less unnecessary spending in government. You could cut spending from the military, for example. Just in 2017, we saw an increase from $630 billion for the military to close to $800 billion under Trump's new proposal. So expenditures that aren't necessary, I feel like we need to cut that. We're not going to cut Social Security or anything like that. But on the portions of the budget that we definitely could revisit and lower the funds for that, I definitely feel like for every bit that we cut on the spending, we should lower the taxes or redirect towards the repairing the debt, lowering the debt by any means.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Do you have more?
Just a short answer: lower taxes, less spending.
Okay. So, Timmy, do you want to say something to that, or?
Yes. I would agree on the decreasing of individual portions of our budget on the spending we have. Without a doubt, the military's budget can be cut and organized in a more efficient way, which is, I'm sure, what Landon meant there. So there's plenty of cuts to be made. I do not agree with the statement that taxes need to be cut more than they are if we're taking the current tax rates in consideration. In fact, I'm a proponent of more progressive tax rates, and so I would say keep the tax rates low for the lower classes, but as you go higher in revenue, the more your taxes increase, and so that once you are getting paid around like a couple $100,000 or $500,000 a year, your tax rate hits somewhere around 50% for all of the money you make after that point. I personally am against, in a capitalist society, taxes ever going above around 50%. I think if you're not going to have a society structured around the means of production being in the hands of the citizens and instead a free market, taking more than 50% is ridiculous. But anything up to 50% I would agree with. So increase taxes, decrease spending on particular parts of the budget, but I also wouldn't worry, honestly, too much with paying off all of our debt. Maybe about half of what we have now, but I wouldn't be getting rid of all of it.
Now, I want to, before I ask you the question, I want to be clear. When you were saying tax rates, you were referring to marginal tax rates, right? When you said...
Yes, marginal tax rates,
Okay.
yes.
I just wanted to be clear about that. All right. So now the question for you, I'll just repeat the question just to be safe. So in an ideal scenario for you, you are presented with a budget that needs to be balanced or at least reined in. Generally, do you think it would be better to raise taxes or reduce spending?
I would go with the raise taxes to a certain degree. Yes. Generally speaking, raise taxes.
Is that it?
Well, I kind of explained my stance to a bit, but I guess I will further it out just a little bit more. The reason I would go with expand taxes is because what is at the heart of a crisis, such as what we went through in 2008, is the need for the government to stimulate the economy. There is a reason we actually got out of the Great Depression. That was increased government spending. Increased government spending comes from increased taxes. So you take those taxes and you invest that into infrastructure. That's tens of thousands of possibly hundreds of thousands of jobs for Americans that will get unemployment rates down. That's money in the hands of Americans. They will spend it in the economy. Overall, I think increased taxes and then at that point, increased spending on more, particularly on things that actually affect the citizens, like infrastructure and not the military. I would actually use the decrease of the military's budget to pay off the debt, and at the same time use the increase from the taxes to increase our infrastructure spending. Because as I stated earlier, I don't think it is of major concern to pay off all of our debt. I actually think it is a net positive to maintain debt at a semi-healthy level.
Okay, Landon, you want to respond to that, or?
Yes, I would like to respond. You were saying earlier, as your rebuttal and my rebuttal, to my statement, that a tax rate around 50, lower than 50, but around it would be good for the higher class, and I don't really...
A marginal tax rate.
Okay, yeah, I'll get into that part, but I do think that I don't think that it should get anywhere near 50%. I feel like when you get to that 50%, it's a lot of what the person makes, and I feel like a comfortable level could be around 35 to 40%, and that's as high as I would make it if we were to follow the progressive tax system, where lower class could probably see cuts because the amount of money they would put through through the federal revenue anyway would be a very insignificant portion. I still want them to pay their taxes, but it'll be much less than what they're paying now. And just so that we can address the issue of marginal tax rates, I do think that in an ideal system, I would remove the loopholes as much as I could and just have people pay the tax of which they're supposed to pay. No ifs, ands, or buts. They're going to pay that tax.
So what you're saying is, well, in regards to that, is what you're saying is, just pulling numbers out of thin air here. So say the marginal tax rates for someone who made $400,000 a year was just pulling a number out. Say it was 40%. So you're saying after that 400,000, they would pay 40% no matter what?
After when they're first filing their taxes, they are going to pay the amount of which they are supposed to pay, and that would address the issue of people finding ways around it. And
no. What I'm saying is once you make that $400,000 a year,
yeah,
that first $400,000 is taxed at, say, pulling a number out of thin air, say it's 30%.
Okay.
So that first $400,000 is taxed at 30%. After that $400,000, it's taxed at the higher rate, the 40%. So I'm trying to clear up what you're saying. What you're saying is after that 400,000, they would be paying that 40% with no matter what, because you're saying you would get rid of loopholes.
Yes.
Okay.
I would remove the loopholes.
I just wanted to clear that up. All right. So let's move on to question 6. So since I started with Landon last time, we'll start with Timmy this time. So sometimes to revitalize an economy, an option worth exploring is the concept of deficit spending. Usually you take tax money and invest it in something that has a decent return on investment. An example could be infrastructure, which could create jobs to increase the flow of money in an economy. Given this information, do you believe that deficit spending is a good way to revitalize the economy in a recession, or do you think there is a better way to do so?
I'm glad we started with me, as I kind of already led into this with my last answer. I do definitely agree that deficit spending is, without a doubt, a good way to revitalize an economy. I think that was a big portion of why 2008, which we have recovered from, I'm not going to lie, not completely, but we have recovered from, why 2008 was as concerning as it was. Because instead of doing massive infrastructure projects and or a lot of what we did during the 1930s and such, instead of doing that, we chose to bail out banks and so forth. But that's besides the point. I would agree that it is good to do that. The most important thing during recession like that, or during downturns in capitalist economies, is to ensure that unemployment rate does not get higher. I am a firm believer that unemployment is more important than inflation, and so it is important during recessions to combat unemployment, and that directly does that by creating jobs and excess money in the economy.
All right, Landon, would you like to respond to that?
Okay. Yes, I would. I do not like the idea of. You seem to be very fond of it, but I don't like the idea of deficit spending. I think that any infrastructure plans, like with what Obama did as his stimulus package, what he did could have been done through means of redirecting budget funds. You could have cut from several different programs, the discretionary ones, not the mandatory ones, such as Social Security and Medicare and all that. Instead, redirecting funds from some of the discretionary spending, say some of the military budget or some other means, would be a better idea than to borrow money and add that to our deficit. I would think that it would be better to lower the debt as much as we could, and deficit spending would only increase the debt we compile. So I do not think that is healthy for our society to deficit spend. Instead, redirect the funds.
All right. Well, you basically just answered the question, so I'm just going to move on to question 7.
Can I rebuttal to him real quick, if that's the case?
Sure.
In response to that, though, I would like to point out that almost any time in the past where we have gone into deficit spending, we have seen massive progress in the recovery of the economy. And for good reason, this stimulates the economy. But the whole purpose of it, and I was a little misdirecting with the way I explained it a little bit earlier, the whole purpose of it is that at first, during the recession, as the recession hits, you would want to either leave taxes or decrease taxes as they are, increase spending, deficit spending, invest into the economy, infrastructure and the such, get the economy up and running again, and without a doubt, typically doing better than it was a decade before the recession. Then once you hit that point, you return to increasing taxes to bring up tax revenue to a higher point than it's ever been and pay off the debt.
All right. So, question number 7. We started with Timmy in the last one, didn't we? Or Tim?
Yes.
Yes.
All right. So I'll start with Landon on this one. Now, this is a fairly short question, and I'm not expecting you to give like a really long, intuitive answer to it. But I was just curious. So which measure is more important to you when you're speaking about the health of a nation, the health of its economy? the national budget, or sorry, not national budget, the national debt or the national deficit?
Personally, I'm not a fan of either, but if I had to choose which one was more important than the other, I would say that keeping our deficit lower is better, because having an increased deficit will only increase the debt much more rapidly. But if we have a smaller deficit, our debt stays at its moderately stable level. I'm saying that because eventually, if you pile on too much, it will get a little hectic. So managing the deficit is the first step you need to take towards lowering debt in the first place, and I feel like that is more important than lowering the debt.
All right. So maybe a more intuitive way of asking this question, and is basically which one you think is more indicative of a healthy, or more indicative of showing the health of an economy. So,
very short answer would be deficit.
Okay, and I'm not going to really give a rebuttal. We have to guys do rebuttals on this one because it's not really a rebuttal type of question. So Timmy, what do you have to say about this?
I would agree with Landon on this point. It would definitely be deficit, and if I could just say for a moment, the reason for that is if you keep your deficit small, and you get to a point in which you realize the debt has grown too high, it doesn't take too much effort to reorganize your budget and to start paying off the debt itself, as long as you keep the deficit low.
Okay. Now, the last question that I have prepared. This is not including the questions that you guys wanted to ask each other. But this is the last question I prepared. This is regarding the estate tax. So we'll ask Timmy this one first. So the recent bill passed by the federal government, which cuts taxes for corporations, the estate tax, and doubled the filing requirement for the estate tax, passed. I phrased that weirdly. I'm sorry, but it passed. And the original in 2017, the original filing for the estate tax was $5 million. Now, as soon as this, I believe it already did, but with the tax plan implemented, it's now $10 million, which means that you're able to pass down 10 million down up from 5 million, 10 million to 5 million, or 5 million to 10 million. So, basically how the estate tax works is that once you die, assuming that the estate tax applies to you, once you die and you pass down your earthly belongings, particularly your money, but your assets as well, once they value above this amount of money, which in this case is $10 million, once it exceeds $10 million, it gets taxed with the estate tax. Now the question is, do you think that is the estate tax something that you favor? And also, do you believe that the requirement should be lowered or raised?
And this was to me first, wasn't it?
This was to you first.
Yes. Okay. My statement will be pretty straight to it. I definitely think it should be lowered, and I do agree with it. I think it's absurd that we value money to such a high degree that we would desire to keep large, vast sums of it. And obviously, it's intended to be passed on to children and other family members after death. But to not want that in any way, shape, or form to be taxed is absurd to me. The amount of tax revenue that could generate to assist paying in multiple government programs that assist every community around the United States is absurd. And to think that for people like the Koch brothers, who will make billions upon billions of dollars throughout their lifetime, already have and will continue to, will get a larger amount untaxed is absurd to me, because they've already succeeded so much in life. Well, what is the desire to succeed more after death?
Also, I should be before Landon gives his probable rebuttal. I'm assuming he wants to give. I should mention that if I'm not mistaken, and I'll look this up while Landon's giving his rebuttal, but if I'm not mistaken, the estate tax applies to per person. So if it's a married couple, it's $10 million per person.
So 20 million in total.
So essentially 20 million. I'll research that. I'll come back to you as soon as after Landon gives his rebuttal. But Landon, go ahead if you want to.
Okay, so I don't have a problem with there being an estate tax. I understand that was part of the question as far as I could perceive. I do think that the estate tax shouldn't be massive. I do think what the parents have earned should go to their kids if that is in their last will, what they want to pass on, what they earned through their life, and if they choose to pass that on, they should have that opportunity to pass as much as they can on. You can tax a bit of it to keep circulation flowing, circulation in the money flowing to help reinvest into programs that the government offers, such as Medicare and other maybe infrastructure projects. But I do think that most of the funds that come from the parents who passed away should go back into their kids, because it is what they earned and what they have chosen to do with their funds. I feel like they can't decide past that point to what happens. So their last will should be very important. It should just be very important what they chose to do with their money. The government can tax it, but it shouldn't be that high of a tax rate.
All right, and I do want to. I will say that. By the way, the estate tax is 40%, so 40% of the money is taxed, or it's taxed at 40%, and it is per person. And it's at 11.2 million is the requirement. So essentially 22.4 million is tax free. Anything above that is taxed at 40%. All right. So Landon, wait, you just give the rebuttal. All right.
The rebuttal kind of leads into the answer, though. So
you basically just gave your answer as well.
It was a rebuttal that tied into my answer. Yes.
Timmy, do you want to rebuttal to him?
No,
or?
I think my answer is a rebuttal to that.
All right. Fair enough. All right. So these next 4 questions are for the both of you, and they are both questions that you guys wanted me to ask you. So we're going to start with this one. So with Donald Trump as president, racism has been brought to the front of discussions and has led to a divisive political environment. Do you think this country could alleviate racism, and what would it take? So I'm going to ask that towards Timmy first.
Thank you for the question, and I do believe it is possible to alleviate racism. To what extent, I'm not 100% sure. I would say that the most important tool in eliminating racism is education, without a doubt. You cannot force people to think differently. It's just not possible. And so if you wish to change something, which I believe racism is a fundamental thought, and by that I mean it is fundamental. If someone is a racist, if someone believes in racist ideas, it's core to them in some way, shape, or form, even if it's only subtly shown. They view the world through the lens that one race or another may be superior to all others or to specific ones, and that fundamentally shapes how they see the world around them. An idea like that cannot be forced out of someone. It has to be educated. They have to be educated. They have to come to an understanding. And at some point, I think there hits a period in a human's life where there is no possible hope of changing their mind. And so by education, I don't mean forcing every American, including adults, down to learn about the dangers of racism. I mean starting with our youth and trying to change every generation subtly until we get to the point where racism is even smaller than it is today, which, by the way, it may be up and coming in our political discourse, but without a doubt, we are at a better time than we ever have been when it comes to the subject of racism.
All right, Landon, would you like to rebut that, or?
I don't think there's a lot for me to rebut. I do agree on many of his points, and I could elaborate on some of my own, but I do think that education is the right place to start, and I do think that racism is at one of its lower points in history. We're in a lot better place than we were back around the time of the Civil Rights Movement and back in time of slavery. I think that is indisputable, and I think we have gone quite a ways, and we have much farther ways to go in combating racism.
All right. Just a question coming at the top of my head. To what degree? This is for either of you to answer. So, to what degree do you think that the Trump phenomena has affected this issue?
That very, very good question there. I think what it has done is, first off, you have to understand, and this is a problem that both sides of the aisle have in this country. They like to view the other side as a monolith. So before I tear this question, I would like to just state that I, without a doubt, believe that the majority of people who voted for Trump are not racist, without a doubt. They're not a monolith. But there is a key portion of his group, however small it may be, that are racist or hold racist beliefs. And they are empowered to some extent by certain comments that he does make. So he does have an influence on bringing it more to the up in front. But I would also say that his influence is no more powerful than the influence of CNN, Fox News, and any other news outlet that would like to continue to perpetrate this dialogue. It's there to some extent. You should shout out a racist and let the world know when racists are doing things that are despicable. To some extent, you should not blast this story of race relations being degraded all throughout the United States 24/7. So I would say the Trump phenomenon is complicit to some extent in this, but no more than the rest of the media is.
All right, Landon, do you want to respond to that?
I would like to join in on this question you'd asked. I do think that Trump himself has not created any more racists. I think what we're seeing are more racists coming forth because they feel like it's more okay now that they've seen some of the mannerisms of Trump throughout the election cycle and some of the things he continues to do. So I don't think we've created racism. I think racism is at the level it still has been for a while. It's getting better, but we are starting to see more of it on the front of newspapers, on like every single scene from news media's every sketch. A lot of things are brought more to the front because of because of the divisiveness of the election cycle. And I feel like it misrepresents the state our country is in compared to where we were in the past. So I do think that Trump hasn't caused an increase in racism, but has only showed the racism that was hidden.
Can I make one little quick statement though? And
Okay.
it's not really a rebuttal to what Landon has said, because I would agree with him on most cases. I personally do not know in any way, shape, or form whether or not Trump is racist, and I don't think he has outright been racist besides for one or two scenarios, that being the comments he made on illegal immigrants. Outside of that, it's more, like he said, the mannerisms and little things he does that emboldens that group. But I would also like to state that any statement I made on the situation of race relations and on racism as a whole in the United States has to deal with directly on an individual case, or not a societal case, an individual case, as in people are less racist than they've ever been. I do still believe wholeheartedly, and to some extent, there are systemic problems in the country that are race related. And so I would say those are, as I stated earlier, better than they've ever been. We don't have entire police departments filled with racists and racist rules being put down by police departments. We have rogue individuals and such, but we have systems that still allow for these individuals to perpetrate this. So I would say there's still a more prevalent issue of systemic racism, but even that is getting better, although it is not as good as I classify individual racism, which is the fact that we have less individual racists in the country.
I know you want to wrap this question up and move on to the next one. Could I just make a quick statement? Just I don't want this to keep going back and forth. Right, I'm not going to disagree with anything Tim put forth, but
all right, this is the last thing being said, and then I'm moving on.
I don't think there's a lot you can do to fix the issue of racism. I think it's something that we're just going to have to kind of get past over time through what Tim has mentioned with education of our youth to hopefully adopt more diverse views so that they can be more welcoming of other races than their own. So I feel like there's not a whole lot we can do in relation to this issue, and it's just something we have to work through as a country, kind of hold together in the meantime.
All right. So for the next question, I'll ask this one to Landon first. So, do you think that a healthy democracy can exist with a two-party system? If not, what reforms do you think can be made?
I have very strong opinion about the two-party system, and I think I can be in the same boat as George Washington, and I do think that he would roll over in his grave if he saw the condition of our two-party system right now. He had said before that it would just lead to bitter divisiveness between each other for no good means. It doesn't produce enough positive results. It's simply kind of a reaction and revenge system where it would eventually cause a rift between people where there was no rift to begin with. It shouldn't have. We shouldn't have to divide ourselves along these party lines to be able to know what's best for our country. It's becoming more of an attached name, an attached identity than it is about the policies themselves. So the state of our two-party system has become less of the values and policies we believe in and more of the name we're kind of associate with and the party we associate with. So I feel like having no parties would be a better solution than having two parties. Well, technically don't have two parties, but it basically does feel like one because third parties aren't going to have too much of a chance at getting elected, and I feel like that's a shame. I do think that to alleviate this two-party system, we could introduce a debate with both sides of the aisle without labels and just have them debate each other, and we can identify those politicians who have policies regardless of their party title. We can agree with their policies and who they are as a person and vote for them rather than worrying about, are they Republican? Are they Democrat? Okay, I'll vote the Republican because I'm Republican, or I'm a Democrat, so I'm going to vote for this person rather than the other person because the name of the party attached to that person. I think that's a horrible state to be in, and it's only causing division between, oh, you're stupid because you're a Democrat or something like that. Like, I feel like it's unproductive to be in a two-party system instead of just debating for the sake of policies rather than debating for what side you're on.
All right. Timmy, what do you have to say about this?
So, I would actually disagree with George Washington on this. I don't think political parties are the definition of evil would be hyperbole here. But what I'm trying to say is I don't think political parties are in essence, death of our democracy. I think the issue we're having here is lack of proper representation. And so I can't remember the correct term, and if you do remember, Trent, please inform me. I think our big issue here is the first past the post voting system that we have. Instead, it needs to be more representative. And so I would go for a voting system where, let's say, there are three parties, the Democrats, Republicans, and Independents. If the Independents get 9% of the vote, they get 9% of the seats. And if you had a system by which it wasn't about winning a state or winning a district to get a seat in the government, but a system by which if I get this much percentage, I get this many seats, you would see more empowered and emboldened third parties than you would now. You would have a more diverse government with more opinions in it because smaller parties would form. The second they get enough percentage to get a couple seats, they would start flexing their muscle, trying to change policy and perhaps growing in size and power, leading to more diversity. I would also, it's funny because as an anarcho-syndicalist, everyone always presumes as an anarchist at heart that I am directly for complete anarchy, as the word says. But what is at the core of anarchy and anarcho-syndicalists is the fact that institutions, and by institutions I'm referencing the political parties right now, institutions should form up from the communities that they come from. It shouldn't be top down, but bottom up that institutions form. So if you had a system by which this percentage voting system was used, you would have more bottom form parties collectively form and actually put into action their policy. Because imagine if a large percentage of the population in Washington is more for a third party. They all vote together. They would get a couple seats in the House of Representatives, despite the fact that let's say the Republicans got 40% and the Democrats got 30%. Well, if they got the other 30%, they would still get some seats. They would still be able to influence politics and have a say for a minority or a different opinion that is not being expressed in Washington.
So, in short, would it be correct to characterize your view as you're more inclined to favor a more parliamentary system?
Yes, exactly. I am more inclined to a more parliamentary system. I do not think that the first past the post works.
Okay. Landon, would you like to respond to that?
I don't think his idea is a bad one. I do think that the problem with his system is the idea of identifying as a party and kind of judging your votes because of the name attached. When some of the times I find that even within my own party, I don't agree on some policies with some of its representatives. So I feel like when you have these parties, you care less about who the person is and you care more about what party they align with. And I feel like that's the wrong way to view politics as. You should know when you're voting for a representative or you're voting for a senator or a president, you should care more about the policies that president or nominee would like to instill than what party title they align with.
Can I rebuttal that, seeing as how I didn't rebuttal his answer, I just kind of answered?
Okay.
Can I? Okay.
Yeah, you can. Yeah, you can.
So I would definitely agree to some degree that there is the issue of hero worship, as some put it, in politics and in political parties. But in a system by which any political party that can etch out just the smallest percentage to get a seat can start to have victory and start to make policy changes, it's easier and more reliable for a citizen to not just stick with a party. If you have fundamental issues with some big policy issues that the Republican Party is going for, perhaps the Libertarian Party fits more. And knowing that if you go there and they only get 6%, they'll still get the amount of seats that represent 6%, it means less of a waste of vote. And I think fundamentally, as I was arguing with my anarcho-syndicalism argument, Humans are naturally organizing creatures. We organize, we form, we collectively do things together. It's part of our social nature. And so I don't think it is possible to get rid of parties in politics. I think it is possible to dampen the effects that a two-party system has when they dominate as they do currently.
All right. So we have two more questions, and this one is regarding gun rights. So I'll ask. I think I asked Landon first on this one, didn't I? On the last one?
Yes.
Yes.
All right. So I'll ask Timmy on this one. So do you think that the original intent or the original interpretation, as in from 1791, of the Second Amendment still holds true? Or do you think that's the way it should be interpreted?
No. And for pretty obvious reasons, I don't think anyone logically is arguing for individuals to be able to have fully automatic weapons. I don't think anyone is arguing for individuals to have armored vehicles. I don't think anyone is arguing for individuals to have military-grade weaponry, is what I'm simply stating by that. And at this point in time, that means the possibility of individuals forming a militia that would actually be able to resist the tyranny of the federal government is just nigh on impossible. These militias would be instantly wiped out as long as it's not a full-on civil war. And so I don't think that interpretation holds true anymore because of that simple fact. Because to be able to maintain that, we would have to be able to maintain a society in which individuals could be as armed almost as heavily as our military, which is, I think, dangerous and chaotic. So no, I do fully believe the Second Amendment is the right for an individual to bear arms, but not for the right for individuals to form militias and to defend against the federal government.
So in short, I mean, you do agree with the at least partially with the Heller case from 2008.
Yes.
Okay. So, Landon, what about you? Or do you want to rebut that? Well, I guess it would be better if you just answer yours because it would be basically a rebuttal to his.
I'll rebuttal and answer at the same time, but
All right.
First, I would like to address the idea of the opposing a tyrannical government. And George Washington had to deal with militias, and he kind of accepted that as the militia's rights to bear arms to keep him and the government in check. And I do think that was one of the original intentions with the Second Amendment. I do think that when you observe the Second Amendment, where it says that a well-regulated militia being necessary to keep the security of a free state, where the free state part I really want to emphasize is less of a geographical state and more of a phase or a condition of freedom rather than a free land, if you will. So in order to ensure that you have your freedoms, you have the right to bear and keep your arms. So in order to keep your freedoms from being obstructed by other people who wish to do you harm, you protect yourself by arming yourself with a weapon. I feel like that right should, and as the second last part of the amendment says, it shouldn't be infringed. It shouldn't be taken away from you. You can regulate which guns you don't want the people to have, and I certainly don't think that certain ages, like 18-year-olds, should be able to purchase rifles, but they can only purchase handguns at 21. I think that's a little backwards. And I do think there are certain places where you can make the case for regulations. And I do agree with the Heller decision where people have the right to keep and bear arms. And I do think that they don't have to be a militia to be able to. They don't have to. The Second Amendment doesn't only tie into the idea of militias keeping tyrannical governments in check. It's also about keeping people's state of freedom secure. It's about allowing them to be able to defend themselves when someone else is trying to end their life or trying to rob them or breaking into a home. I feel like that's the state of freedom I'm talking about here, where people need that right to protect themselves.
All right, and before I go to the last question, I just want to clarify for the audience that, in essence, the Heller decision was basically a Supreme Court decision in 2008 that basically interpreted the Second Amendment as an individual right to bear arms, as opposed to a well-regulated militia, which is what the amendment says, but the Supreme Court interpreted it as basically an individual right. All right, so this is the last question we have, and I'll give this one to Timmy since it went to Landon last time. So
Thought I went to Timmy first time.
No, it went to me first last time. Start with Landon.
So start with Landon? Okay,
Yes.
my bad. All right, so this is a good libertarian question. At what point does individual liberty infringe upon another's?
Okay, so I
So
think
basically, where does your liberty start, or where does your liberty end and my liberty start? To be clear.
well, I guess there's several different aspects of your liberty that you're given. You're given the right to you're given the freedom to celebrate and worship whatever religion you want. I don't think that anyone's religion necessarily imposes it doesn't infringe upon anyone else's religion, and nor should speech. Unless that speech is a call to action of which you're shouting fire in a theater or bomb in an airport, where you can literally cause mass stampedes and serious harm to innocent people because you shouted something that incited a call to action. That is one of the only points of which I would concede that a liberty infringes upon another's. If you're using your freedom of speech to be a jerk for example, you're not accepting someone's use of gender pronouns, I feel like it doesn't really infringe upon their liberties. It's offensive, and you're not a nice guy for doing it, but you don't infringe upon someone else's liberties by being a jerk, by saying stuff like a jerk does, unless you physically harm them, of course. And if you're to take your right to bear arms and you're to literally go up and use your right to bear arms to invoke pain and harm onto someone else, of course, then you're violating that liberty that someone else has to pursuit of happiness, if you will. I do think that that's technically a freedom. Everyone has the freedom to pursue a life that is happy for them, and you technically do end that life that is happy for them when you take such actions.
All right, so Timmy, do you want to rebut that, or?
I feel like my answer would be enough of a rebuttal.
All right.
So, at the point in which one individual's liberty infringes upon another is very slim, in my opinion. There's very specific cases. I would agree with Landon on speech. The only time speech infringing on another being call to action in public places that causes harm to the public. So that would be the few cases in which I would not stand up for one's right for freedom of speech. I would also go one step further, though, to claim that everyone in their in the freedom to have their pursuit of happiness has the freedom to live and enjoy a life on this planet. And so, at one point, and this is a clear distinction between my beliefs and most libertarians, I believe you are directly infringing upon someone's freedom when you destroy the environment around you. When you destroy the environment or dampen the environment's ability to recover, you infringe upon every other individual, not even including every other animal, but every other individual human that lives on this planet, and their right to this planet as well. You have no more government or God-given right, however you may want to view it. you have no more right than any other individual does to this planet. And so at that point, when a company decides to pollute the environment, increase carbon dioxide into the air, and slowly cause the greenhouse effect, they are directly infringing upon the liberties of millions upon billions of individuals. And so that would be another one of my few cases in which one individual's liberty infringes upon another individual's liberty. Beyond that, I would say that there isn't really any other case. Like I said, or like Landon said, hate speech or refusing to say pronouns, which might as well be considered hate speech. Hate speech is a protected First Amendment right, or it's you have the right to say these things because they don't directly affect anyone's lives. Feelings are not protected, a protected right.
All right, so since that was basically Timmy's answer, Landon, do you want to rebut that, or?
It's not so much of a grievance against what he said. It was more just like it was a point that I didn't bring up, but is a point that I will concede to him. I do think that when you are affecting the environment in which people live in to such a drastic by such a drastic means, you are effectively infringing upon the people's liberty to live in an environment that is healthy for them. You're diminishing their pursuit of happiness. You're diminishing their rights to do the things they want to do because you've limited the space of which people can go through and operate. And you've probably would mess with the temperatures and all that too. So I mean that's not good either, for sure. And I do think that Tim here has a good on environment pollution he brought up.
Right. Well, so just to clarify that before we wrap it up here, I'm going to assume that when you guys are talking about the environment and how that infringing on people's liberties, like to give an example to that would be like fracking. And if you don't know what fracking is basically you're putting chemicals into the ground where you think natural gas is, and basically in order to get the natural gas out, you're either exploding it or you're trying to loosen up the land around it so you can get the natural gas out. So basically, you're injecting chemicals into the ground to get this natural gas out. And a lot of the times what that does is the chemicals can seep into an aquifer, or the chemicals can just ruin the ground, ruin the soil if it's around. So I'm assuming that's an example of what you guys are referencing when you guys are talking about the environment.
For me personally, yes.
That would effectively impede their freedom to drink water, for example, or to plant crops or whatever their pursuit of happiness, or just to survive, really.
Okay. All right. Well, that's all the questions I have. Do you guys have anything you want to mention or ask before we wrap it up?
I think I'm quite all right where it stands.
Yeah, me too. I would enjoy to have further debates on topics, but without increasing the length of this debate, I have nothing further to say about what we have discussed.
All right. Well, that's all I have then. So.
Hello. You have made it to the end of the first TDM debate. I would like to thank you for taking your time to listen to this content, and if you enjoyed it, please leave a like and subscribe. More importantly, if you really enjoyed this content, please join us over on the Discord channel or leave comments down on YouTube. That way you could be a more active participant in further debates. These debates are hosted directly through a voice chat channel in our Discord, so it's easy for the community to get involved in some way, shape, or form, whether that be asking questions or just listening along. Once again, I'd like to thank you for taking the time out of your day to listen to this. I'd also like to thank Landon for participating in this debate with me, and allowing us to have such a good discussion, and TDMTA for moderating and for the questions that he put forward. Thank you, and have a great night, morning, evening, whatever it may be.